Groom sees bride's childhood friend teaching flower girl a secret dance. His reaction shocked all. Hi viewers, welcome back to Storytime with Mr. Taylor. Before we get started, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment below telling me about a moment when you discovered something that completely changed how you saw someone. Maybe it was a secret they'd been keeping, or a connection you never knew existed. Share that moment with me because today's story is all about hidden truths that surface at the worst possible time. I'm praying for each and every one of you watching right now. Whatever you're going through, whether it's confusion about love, pain from the past, or questions about your future, I pray this story gives you clarity and courage. Now hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into this incredible story. The groom froze mid-step at his own wedding reception, watching a woman he barely knew teach his childhood secret to a 5-year-old flower girl. That dance, those exact movements, belonged to his late mother, a memory he'd buried with her 18 years ago in Savannah. But the woman performing it wasn't his bride. It was her childhood best friend, trembling under his gaze, about to reveal a connection that would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and fate. What would you do if a stranger knew your deepest family secret, one you never told a soul? Have you ever discovered that someone in your life was connected to you long before you met? Has a hidden bond ever surfaced at the worst possible moment? This groom was about to face a truth that would force him to choose between the woman he promised forever to and the woman fate had been pushing him toward all along. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about destiny. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story takes turns you won't see coming, and I need you here for every single one. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to where Christopher Lane's story really began. Not at the altar, but in a living room in Savannah, during a thunderstorm that changed his life forever. He was 12 years old the last time his mother danced with him, her laughter filling their Savannah living room as rain hammered the windows. 3 days later, she was gone. Thunder rolled across Savannah like drums, each crack shaking the floorboards beneath their bare feet. She spun him once, twice, her dress swirling around her legs, and he laughed, really laughed, the kind that makes your stomach hurt and your cheeks ache. "You remember the steps, baby?" his mother asked, her voice warm as summer honey. Her hands held his gently, guiding him through movements that felt like magic. Turn left, hop twice, spin around, reach for the sky. Simple steps, but they belonged to them alone. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they danced like the world outside didn't exist. "When you find the woman who makes your heart dance like this," his mother said, pulling him close for the final spin, "don't let her go. You'll know her because she'll make you feel brave enough to be yourself. Not the version you think people want, the real you." Christopher nodded, not fully understanding but memorizing every word anyway. He memorized the way she smelled, vanilla and lavender, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the warmth of her hands in his. 3 days later, she collapsed in the kitchen. The doctor said it was an aneurysm, no warning, no goodbye. Just there one moment, gone the next. At the funeral, 12-year-old Christopher made himself a promise. That dance, their dance, would stay buried with her. It was too precious to share, too painful to remember. 22 years passed. Christopher Lane became the man his mother would have been proud of. Successful real estate developer in Atlanta, building affordable housing for families who needed it most. He'd built an empire, but he'd built walls around his heart too. Walls that kept him safe, walls that kept him alone. He dated, sure. Professional women with impressive careers and polished smiles. But nothing stuck. Nothing felt right. Because deep down, he was still that 12-year-old boy, dancing in a storm, wondering if he'd ever feel that free again. Do you have a memory so sacred you've never shared it with anyone? A moment that belongs only to you? Drop a heart below if you're carrying something like that. 22 years later, standing at a charity gala in Raleigh, North Carolina, Christopher would meet Rebecca Carter, a woman whose smile reminded him of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. What he didn't know was that loving her would lead him straight back to that dance floor in Savannah, to a secret his mother took to her grave. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention. She earned it by listening when everyone else was talking. The ballroom glittered with Atlanta's elite, champagne glasses catching light like captured stars. But Christopher only saw her, standing by the silent auction table, studying a photograph of children in a Greenville community center with an intensity that made him forget his rehearsed small talk. Rebecca Carter wore a simple black dress that somehow made every other woman in the room look overdone. She tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear as she read the description beneath the photo, her lips moving slightly as she absorbed every word. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Christopher said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. She looked up, startled, then smiled. Not the practiced smile he usually got at these events, a real one that reached her eyes. "These kids," she said, pointing to the photo. "They're from my hometown, Greenville, South Carolina. I used to volunteer at that center when I was younger." They talked for 3 hours. Christopher learned she was a social worker, that she believed in second chances, that she'd grown up poor but never let it define her limits. She asked about his mother, not because she'd heard he'd lost her, but because something in his eyes told her he carried grief. When they danced, a formal waltz the event required, his hand found the small of her back and her body fit against his like a question he hadn't known to ask. Close enough to feel connected, but not close enough to be vulnerable. Safe, comfortable, perfect on paper. 6 months into their relationship, as Rebecca showed him childhood photos spread across her coffee table, one image stopped him cold. A skinny girl with fierce eyes stood beside young Rebecca, both covered in mud and grinning like they'd just conquered the world. "That's Danielle," Rebecca said softly, her voice carrying something Christopher couldn't quite name. "My best friend from Greenville. She saved my life once." Christopher picked up the photo, studying the fierce-eyed girl. "How?" Rebecca took the photo from his hands, placing it face down on the table. "It's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you someday." She never did. Have you ever met someone who felt right on paper but something whispered you were missing a piece of the puzzle? Tell me about it in the comments. 6 months into their relationship, as Rebecca showed him childhood photos spread across her coffee table, one image stopped him cold. A skinny girl with fierce eyes stood beside young Rebecca, both covered in mud and grinning. "That's Danielle," Rebecca said softly. "My best friend from Greenville. She saved my life once." Christopher didn't ask how. He should have. He proposed on a rooftop in Charlotte, the city lights spelling out forever. She said yes, but her eyes flickered to her phone, to a text from Danielle, before they flickered back to him. Christopher had planned everything perfectly. String lights formed a path to the rooftop's edge where a table waited with roses and champagne. The ring, a 2-carat diamond his mother would have approved of, sat in his pocket, burning a hole through his confidence. "Rebecca Carter," he said, dropping to one knee as the city sprawled below them like a carpet of stars. "Will you marry me?" Her eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course, yes." But before she threw her arms around him, before the kiss that sealed their engagement, her phone buzzed on the table. Christopher saw her glance at it, just a flicker, barely a second, and something crossed her face. Relief? Guilt? He couldn't tell. The text preview read, "Call me when you can. D." "Danielle?" Christopher asked as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "My best friend," Rebecca said quickly. "I texted her earlier that tonight felt important. She's probably freaking out." She silenced her phone and pulled Christopher close. "Nothing matters right now except us." Wedding planning started immediately. Rebecca threw herself into it with an intensity that surprised Christopher. Every detail had to be perfect. The flowers, the venue, the cake, the guest list. "Danielle has to be my maid of honor," Rebecca insisted during their first meeting with the wedding planner. "She's been my person since we were kids. I can't do this without her." Christopher agreed, of course. How could he not? 3 weeks later, Danielle Brooks walked into the wedding planner's office like she was bracing for impact. Shoulders squared, chin up, eyes scanning for exits. Her thrift store dress and scuffed boots clashed with the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but she didn't shrink. If anything, she expanded, filling the space with something Christopher couldn't name. When she shook his hand, her grip was firm, her palm calloused. The contact lasted a beat too long, her dark eyes holding his with a directness that felt like a challenge. "Nice to finally meet the man who got her to settle down," she said, and he couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a warning. "Have you ever felt threatened by your partner's best friend? Like they knew a version of them you'd never reach? Share your experience below." As Danielle left the meeting, she paused at the door, glancing back at Christopher with an expression he couldn't read. Part sadness, part recognition, part something else entirely. "She's lucky to have you," Danielle said quietly. "Don't prove me wrong." The words felt less like a blessing and more like a test. 3 months before the wedding, Rebecca took Christopher to her childhood neighborhood in Greenville. The house where she grew up was gone, but the woman who raised Danielle was still there, and she looked at Christopher like she'd seen a ghost. The neighborhood sagged with neglect, boarded windows, cracked sidewalks, houses leaning into each other like exhausted fighters. But Mrs. Brooks's front porch blazed with flowers, defiant splashes of color against the gray. She rocked in her chair, eyes sharp despite her age, and when Christopher stepped onto that porch, her hand flew to her mouth. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Brooks whispered, staring at Christopher like he'd risen from the dead. "You look just like—" "Grandma Brooks, this is Christopher," Rebecca interrupted quickly, her voice too bright, too loud. "Christopher Lane, my fiancé." Mrs. Brooks stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Christopher's face. "Lane," she repeated. "From where, baby?" "Savannah originally," Christopher said, extending his hand. "Though I live in Atlanta now." The old woman's grip was surprisingly strong. "Your mama," she said carefully. "She teach dance?" Christopher's blood went cold. "She did. A long time ago. How did you—" "Small world," Rebecca cut in again, practically pulling Christopher off the porch. "We should get going. Dinner reservations, remember?" In the car, Christopher tried to ask questions, but Rebecca deflected everyone. "Mrs. Brooks raised Danielle after her mom left. She's getting old, confused sometimes. Don't read too much into it." But Christopher couldn't stop thinking about the way the old woman had looked at him. Like she knew something. Like she was seeing his mother's ghost. That night in their hotel room, Rebecca initiated contact with unusual urgency, as if trying to anchor Christopher to her, to override whatever questions were forming in his mind. Her kisses were desperate, her touch almost frantic. "Promise me something," she whispered against his neck as they lay tangled in sheets. "Promise you'll always choose me." "I promise," Christopher said, holding her close, not understanding what he was promising or why it felt so heavy. Have you ever sensed your partner was hiding something, but loved them too much to dig deeper? Where's the line between trust and willful blindness? Talk to me in the comments. Later that night, Christopher couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and searched. Dance instructor Savannah, Georgia, 2003. The results that populated the screen made his blood run cold. Among the images was a dance studio. His mother's studio, the one she ran before she got sick. And in one photo, standing beside his mother with a shy smile, was a little girl who looked exactly like a young Danielle Brooks. He told himself he was being crazy. He told himself coincidence was just coincidence. But at 2 a.m., he was still scrolling through archived websites, following threads that led straight back to the woman he'd barely noticed at the wedding planner's office. His home office in Atlanta felt suffocating at this hour, the city lights beyond his window blinking like distant warnings. Each click revealed another connection, another thread linking Danielle to his past. His mother's handwriting in an old blog post. "Today, I taught the saddest little girl the happiest dance. Sometimes that's all we can give each other, moments that outlast the pain." Christopher's hands shook as he clicked through more archived pages. His mother's studio had kept a photo gallery of students. There was Danielle, younger, skinnier, eyes haunted but trying to smile. The caption read, "New student Danielle, age 11, showing remarkable progress." Age 11. The same year his mother got sick. He found more. A local newspaper article about his mother's memorial service. In the crowd of mourners, partially hidden behind adults, was that same little girl. Danielle had been there. She'd watched them bury his mother, and she'd never said a word. The office door opened. Rebecca stood there in his t-shirt, hair messy from sleep. "Come to bed," she said softly. "Did you know?" The question came out harder than he intended. "Did you know Danielle knew my mother?" Rebecca's face went carefully blank. "What are you talking about?" "Your best friend attended my mother's dance studio. She was at her funeral. And you never thought to mention that?" "Chris, Rebecca crossed the room, reaching for him. "I didn't know. Danielle never talked about that time in her life. It was too painful." "How was I supposed to know?" She kissed him before he could ask more questions. Her hands pulled at his shirt, her body pressing against his with an urgency that felt like distraction. They had relations right there in his office chair, but it felt desperate, transactional. Her trying to pull him back to her, him trying to forget what he'd discovered. "Where are you?" she whispered during the act, sensing his mental absence. "Right here," he lied. "Would you confront the truth if it might destroy your happiness? Or would you marry the person you love and bury what you found? Be honest in the comments. What would you do?" The wedding was 8 weeks away when Christopher made his decision. He wouldn't confront Danielle, he wouldn't ask questions, he would marry Rebecca, build the life they'd planned, and let the past stay buried where it belonged. It was the rational choice, the safe choice, the choice that would have worked if Danielle hadn't shown up at his office 3 days later, unannounced, with tears streaming down her face and 7 words that shattered everything. "I can't let you marry her blind." She stood in his office doorway, this woman he'd barely spoken to, and said the words that would change his life. "Your mother saved me. Now I have to save you." Christopher looked up from his desk, startled. Danielle's mascara ran in dark streaks down her cheeks. Her hands shook as she gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "How did you get past security?" Christopher asked, standing slowly. "I told them it was an emergency." Her voice cracked. "And it is. I can't let you marry Rebecca without knowing the truth." Christopher's heart hammered. What truth? She paced his office like a caged thing, words tumbling out between sobs. "I was 11 when my mom abandoned me. Left me at a bus station with a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. I lived on the streets for 2 weeks before your mother found me sleeping behind her dance studio." Christopher's breath caught. "My mother. She didn't call the cops. She didn't turn me over to child services. She taught me to dance instead." Danielle wiped her eyes roughly. "Every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months. She fed me. Let me shower in the studio bathroom. Gave me a safe place when I had nothing." Christopher sank into his chair, memories flooding back. His mother coming home late on certain nights, always with that satisfied smile. "I'm helping someone," she'd said when he asked. "Someone who needs it more than we know." "Your mother got sick," Danielle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The cancer moved fast. But before she died, she made me promise something. She said if I ever met her son, and she said when, not if, like she knew somehow, I had to give him a message." "What message?" Christopher's voice came out strangled. Danielle met his eyes. "She said to tell you not to marry for safety, to marry for the dance." The room tilted. Christopher gripped his desk edge. "She taught me your dance, Christopher. The one you did together during storms. She said it was about joy, not grief. About finding someone who makes you brave enough to be vulnerable. She said you'd know the difference when you felt it, and if you didn't feel it, don't fake it." Christopher moved to comfort her without thinking. When his hand touched her shoulder, electricity shot through him. Not attraction exactly, something deeper. Recognition. Like meeting a missing piece of himself he didn't know was lost. He pulled back, shaken. Danielle's eyes searched his face. Do you feel it with Rebecca? That thing your mother described? Or are you marrying her because she's safe? Because she won't ask you to risk your heart the way your mother did? The question hung between them, heavy and impossible. I don't know, Christopher admitted, the words costing him everything. Then you need to figure it out, Danielle said, before you stand at that altar and promise forever to someone you're only giving half of yourself to. How do you know the difference between real love and comfortable love? Between the person you should marry and the person you want to marry? This question haunts so many of us. Share your wisdom below. Christopher stood frozen as Danielle wiped her eyes and headed for the door. Wait, he called out. The wedding is in 6 weeks. If I don't feel it with Rebecca... He couldn't finish the sentence. Danielle turned back, her expression unreadable. Then you need to figure out who you're really marrying, the woman at the altar or the ghost of your mother's approval. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Christopher alone with a question that terrified him. What if his mother had been right? Doubt is a quiet killer. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits in your chest during wedding cake tastings and seating chart discussions, whispering, "Are you sure?" Christopher became a ghost in his own engagement. He showed up to appointments, nodded at Rebecca's choices, smiled for the photographer. But his mind lived somewhere else, in conversations with a dead woman and the girl she'd saved. Rebecca noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're stressed about the wedding," she said one night over dinner at their favorite restaurant. "It's normal. Cold feet happens to everyone." "I'm fine," Christopher lied, pushing food around his plate. "Then why haven't you touched me in 2 weeks?" Rebecca's voice was quiet, hurt. He had no answer that wouldn't destroy her. 3 days after Danielle's visit, Christopher found himself searching for her online. She didn't have much social media, a Facebook page with the privacy settings locked down, an Instagram account with 15 followers. But he found an address for a community center in Greenville where she volunteered. He drove there on a Wednesday afternoon, telling himself he just needed more information about his mother. Telling himself this was about closure, not about the woman who delivered the message. They sat on a bench in Piedmont Park, strangers bound by a dead woman's memory. Danielle told him stories his mother never had the time to share. How she laughed when she messed up routines, how she hummed off-key while cooking, how she believed dancing was prayer in motion. Christopher listened, hungry for pieces of his mother he'd never known, not realizing he was also learning about the woman beside him. Danielle's strength, her loyalty, the way she'd taken his mother's kindness and built a life around giving it back to others. "You teach kids now?" Christopher asked. "Kids who need someone to see them," Danielle said. "The way your mother saw me. It's not much, but it's something." Their hands rested on the bench between them. Christopher's pinky brushed against hers, accidental at first, then not. The contact sent warmth through him that he hadn't felt with Rebecca in months, maybe ever. Danielle pulled away first. "This isn't right," she whispered, but neither of them moved. The air between them thickened with possibility and guilt. "I should go," Christopher said, but his fingers lingered against hers for one breath too long. That's when Rebecca appeared on the path ahead, having tracked his location through his phone. Her face crumbled. "What is happening here? Why are you with her instead of me? We're supposed to be planning our future, and you're... what? Reliving your past?" Christopher stood, guilt flooding through him. "Rebecca, it's not..." "Don't." She held up her hand. "Don't lie to me, not now." Danielle rose quickly. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have..." "No," Rebecca said, her voice cold. "You shouldn't have, but you did anyway. When is emotional intimacy with someone else a betrayal? Where's the line between innocent connection and emotional infidelity? I need your perspective in the comments because this situation is complicated." That night, Rebecca issued an ultimatum through tears. "The wedding is in 4 weeks. Either you stop seeing Danielle entirely, or we're done. I won't compete with a memory or her messenger." Christopher agreed. He stopped returning Danielle's calls, deleted her number, threw himself into wedding preparations with desperate intensity. It should have worked. It would have worked. Except 3 weeks later, at the final wedding rehearsal, Danielle appeared at the back of the church, and she wasn't alone. The rehearsal was perfect. Flowers in place, music cued, family smiling. Then Danielle walked through those church doors holding a little girl's hand, and Christopher's carefully constructed world began to crack. The little girl, Amara, 5 years old with braids tied with yellow ribbons, looked up at Christopher with devastating familiarity. She tilted her head the same way his mother used to when she was thinking. She bit her lip before speaking, just like his mother did. "That's my goddaughter," Danielle said quietly as Rebecca hugged the child. "She's your flower girl, remember?" Christopher had approved the choice weeks ago without paying attention. Now he couldn't look away. The rehearsal proceeded. The wedding party practiced their entrances. The officiant ran through the ceremony. Everyone laughed at appropriate moments. But Christopher watched Amara. The way she moved, the way she smiled, the way Danielle knelt beside her and whispered encouragement that made the little girl glow. After the rehearsal ended, Christopher found Danielle in the church parking lot, helping Amara into her car seat. "Why is she here?" Christopher demanded, his voice harsher than he intended. Danielle straightened. "Because Rebecca asked me to bring her. She's the flower girl." "That's not what I mean." Christopher stepped closer. "Why does she move like that? Why does she look like your mother?" Danielle finished. "Because I teach her the things your mother taught me. I'm passing it forward. The kindness, the joy, the belief that dancing can save you when nothing else can." Christopher's chest tightened. "You taught her the dance." "Not yet." Danielle's eyes met his. "But I will. When she's ready. When she understands what it means." "Why?" The question came out broken. "Because your mother believed joy should never die just because we do. Because she believed in legacies that outlast grief. Because she made me promise that her son would remember how to be happy. Even if I had to show him through a 5-year-old girl who's never known pain." The tension between them had evolved. No longer just recognition, but genuine attraction neither wanted to acknowledge. "This isn't about us," Danielle said firmly, stepping back. "This is about you being honest about who you love and why." But when she walked away, Christopher felt the loss physically, a hollowing in his chest. "Why did you really come tonight?" Christopher demanded. Danielle met his eyes. "Because tomorrow you're going to make a promise in front of God and everyone you know. And I needed to look at you one last time and know you're making it for the right reasons. Are you marrying Rebecca because you love her? Or because she's the opposite of everything that hurt you?" Christopher had no answer. Sometimes the people who challenge us love us more than the people who comfort us. Do you agree? Have you ever had someone push you toward a truth you were running from? Tell me about it below. Christopher didn't sleep that night. He stood on his balcony until dawn, Rebecca sleeping peacefully inside, unaware he was falling apart. By sunrise, he'd made a decision. He would go through with the wedding. He had to. He'd made promises, signed contracts, invited 300 people. But as he walked back inside and looked at Rebecca's sleeping form, he knew the truth. He was about to marry the wrong woman for all the right reasons. Wedding mornings are supposed to feel like magic. Christopher's felt like a countdown to a detonation he couldn't stop. The venue, a historic mansion in Charleston with columns and gardens that belonged on postcards, buzzed with activity. Florists adjusted arrangements, caterers set tables, photographers tested angles. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. Christopher's reflection in the mirror showed a man in an expensive tuxedo going through motions he'd rehearsed but never felt. "You look like you're preparing for a funeral, not a wedding," his best man, Marcus, said from the doorway. "Just nervous," Christopher lied. "Bull," Marcus crossed the room. "I've known you since college. I've seen you nervous before business deals worth millions. This is something else." Christopher adjusted his bow tie for the 3rd time. "I'm fine. You're about to marry a woman you've been emotionally checked out from for weeks. That's not fine, that's a disaster. Before Christopher could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's not too late to choose joy over safety. D. His hands shook. Downstairs, Christopher saw Danielle arrive, carrying boxes of decorations Rebecca had forgotten. Her bridesmaid dress brought out her eyes in a way that made his chest ache. He found her in an empty hallway, arranging flowers on a side table. "You look beautiful," he said without meaning to. She flinched. "Don't do that. Not today. Not when you're about to marry my best friend." But she didn't move away, and neither did he. They stood too close in the narrow space. The moment stretched, dangerous and electric. "I lied to you at the church," Danielle whispered, her voice breaking. "I said this wasn't about us. But Christopher, I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day in your office. And I hate myself for it, because Rebecca is everything to me, and I'm about to watch you break both our hearts." Christopher opened his mouth to respond. To say what? He didn't know. "Christopher!" Rebecca's mother appeared at the end of the hallway. 5 minutes until you need to be in position." Danielle fled in the opposite direction. What would you do if you realized you had feelings for the wrong person at the worst possible time? Is there such a thing as right person, wrong time? Or is that just a story we tell ourselves? Drop your thoughts below. Christopher stood alone, his heart hammering. The realization that terrified him most finally clear. He was in love with 2 women, but only one of them truly knew him, and she was wearing the wrong dress. The music started. Guests stood. The wedding processional began. And Christopher stood at that altar knowing the next hour would either be his greatest commitment or his biggest mistake. The aisle stretched before him like a gauntlet. Each bridesmaid passed, friends of Rebecca's he barely knew, smiling and graceful. Then Danielle appeared and time fractured. She moved like his mother used to, with quiet dignity and hidden strength. Her eyes found his and held, and in that gaze he read everything: grief, longing, regret, and a plea he couldn't name. Then she took her position and looked away, releasing him to his fate. The music changed. Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle, her father's arm linked through hers. She looked stunning, the dress perfect, her hair arranged in soft curls, her smile radiant despite the trembling at the corners. Christopher's throat closed. She walked toward him, each step bringing her closer to a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. When she reached the altar, she handed her bouquet to Danielle. Their fingers touched briefly, and Christopher saw Rebecca's hand shake. The officiant began. Words about love and commitment and forever washed over Christopher like white noise. He heard himself respond at appropriate moments, felt his mouth forming words his heart didn't believe. When Rebecca reaches the altar, Christopher notices details with painful clarity. The way her hand trembles as she gives her bouquet to Danielle. The perfume she chose, his mother's favorite, a fact he'd mentioned once. The desperate hope in her eyes. She's trying so hard. He should love her for that. Why doesn't he? The ceremony proceeded through readings and prayers. Rebecca's hands gripped his, her palms damp with nerves. She looked at him like he hung the moon, like he was everything she'd ever wanted, and he felt nothing but guilt. The officiant's voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you, Christopher Lane, take Rebecca Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The pause stretched. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca's eyes widened. Christopher's mouth opened. His voice cracked. He looked at Rebecca, at the hope dying in her eyes. He looked at Danielle, at the tears streaming down her face as she mouthed something he couldn't quite read. He looked at the guests, 300 people waiting for 2 simple words. If you realized at the altar you were making a mistake, would you have the courage to stop it? Or would you go through with it to avoid hurting everyone? This is the moment that defines who we really are. Tell me what you'd do. And then he looked at the flower girl, little Amara, who suddenly began to dance. Small, tentative movements Christopher recognized instantly. The dance. His mother's dance. and everything stopped. In the middle of a wedding ceremony, a 5-year-old flower girl began to dance, and 300 people watched a groom's world fall apart. The little girl moved with the unself-conscious joy of childhood, her yellow dress spinning as she performed steps that belonged to a dead woman and a grieving boy. Each movement was slightly imperfect, but unmistakably right. The turn, the hop, the hand flourish that ended with fingers pointing to the sky. Christopher couldn't breathe. The church walls seemed to close in. His mother was dead 18 years, but in that moment, she was alive again in a child who'd never met her. How does she know that? Christopher's voice shattered the silence, raw and accusatory. He stepped away from Rebecca, moving toward the little girl. How does that child know my mother's dance? Guests murmured in confusion. Rebecca's hand dropped to her side, the bouquet falling to the floor. Danielle stepped forward, her face wet with tears. Because your mother taught it to me, and I taught it to her. Because your mother believed joy should never die just because we do. Because she made me promise. Promise what? Christopher demanded, his voice breaking. Your mother told me that when I met you, and she said when, not if, I should teach you the dance again. She said you'd forgotten how to be happy, how to be vulnerable, how to choose joy over safety. She said you'd need someone to remind you. Danielle's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the stunned silence. I didn't know I was falling in love with you while I did it. I didn't know it would destroy everything. In the chaos, Christopher and Danielle's eyes locked across the space between them. The connection was undeniable now, witnessed by everyone. Rebecca saw it. The guests saw it. The truth was exposed not through confession but through recognition. These two people understood each other in a way that transcended logic or convenience. Christopher's hands shook. His carefully controlled life was falling apart in front of 300 witnesses, and he couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it. Rebecca's voice cut through the chaos, quiet but devastating. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Christopher turned to face his bride, his almost wife, standing at the altar alone, her dress perfect, her makeup running, her world ending. He opened his mouth to deny it, to fix it, to lie. But for the first time in his life, he chose truth over safety. Yes, he whispered. I think I am. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had already detonated. Rebecca's face crumbled. Danielle covered her mouth with her hands. Someone in the back gasped. Rebecca picked up her bouquet with trembling hands. Then I guess we're done here. She walked down the aisle, not as a bride, but as a woman who just watched her future dissolve in front of everyone she knew. Her mother tried to stop her. She kept walking. The church doors slammed shut behind her. Christopher stood frozen at the altar, his bow tie choking him, his heart hammering. He'd just destroyed 3 lives in 30 seconds. Danielle turned to follow Rebecca, but Christopher caught her arm. Wait. Don't touch me. She jerked away, her eyes full of pain and fury. Don't you dare touch me. I just betrayed my best friend. I just ruined her wedding. For what? For this? She gestured at the chaos around them. Guests whispering, family members crying, photographers still snapping pictures of the disaster. I need to go, Danielle said, her voice breaking. I need to find Rebecca. I need to... But Rebecca was already gone. When destiny and choice collide, which one wins? Can you be fated to meet someone, but still choose the wrong path? This moment right here. This is what the whole story has been building toward. Comment below if you saw this coming, or if I got you good. A wedding ended without a marriage. A friendship shattered without a fight. And 2 people stood in the wreckage of what they'd destroyed, wondering if honesty was worth the cost. The reception hall stood ready, tables set with crystal and china, cake untouched, dance floor empty. Thousands of dollars in flowers and food and decorations for a celebration that would never happen. Christopher sat alone at the head table, his bow tie undone, his carefully constructed life in ruins around him. Most of the guests had left. Some lingered in small groups, whispering. Christopher's father had tried to talk to him. Christopher had nothing to say. Danielle found him there an hour later. She'd changed out of her bridesmaid dress into jeans and a t-shirt. Her face was swollen from crying. They don't touch, but the space between them vibrates with everything unsaid, everything impossible. "We can't," she says before he speaks. "Rebecca will never forgive me. I'll never forgive myself. What we feel doesn't matter if it's built on her broken heart." Christopher looked at her. "I was supposed to marry her. I was supposed to build a life with her. I was supposed to be the kind of man who keeps his promises." Danielle sat beside him, careful not to let their shoulders touch. "You are that kind of man. That's why you stopped. That's why you told the truth. Keeping that promise would have been the real betrayal. Then why does it feel like I just destroyed everything?" "Because you did." Danielle's voice was raw. "We did. And now we have to live with it." Christopher dropped his head into his hands. "I don't know how. Neither do I." They sat in silence, two people who'd found each other at exactly the wrong time, in exactly the wrong way. Is honesty always the right choice? Would it have been kinder to marry Rebecca and live a lie? Or was Christopher right to stop, even though it destroyed everything? I genuinely want to know what you think. Comment below. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, still in her wedding dress, mascara stained and devastating. "I need to understand something," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Did you ever love me? Or was I just a placeholder for what you were too afraid to feel?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that would either offer mercy or deliver the final blow. Sometimes the person you hurt knows exactly why they're being hurt, because they've been there before. Christopher stood, but Rebecca held up her hand. "Don't. Just answer the question." "I cared about you," Christopher said, his voice hollow. "I wanted to love you the way you deserved. But you didn't." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "You couldn't. And I knew it." Danielle's head snapped up. "What?" Rebecca looked at her former best friend, and something shifted in her expression. Not anger exactly. Exhaustion. "I convinced myself your kindness was love," Rebecca said to Christopher. "Your reliability was passion. Your presence was enough. But I knew. God, I knew every time you looked at me like you were trying to feel something that wouldn't come. I just thought, if I was patient enough, perfect enough, it would eventually be real." Christopher felt like he'd been punched. "Then why did I keep planning the wedding?" Rebecca smiled sadly. "Because I was afraid to be alone. Because on paper you were everything I should want. Because I thought maybe love could grow from respect and compatibility." She turned to Danielle. "You know what the worst part is? I saw how he looked at you that first day in the wedding planner's office. I saw recognition, connection, all the things I'd been working for, and you hadn't even tried. And I still brought you into the wedding. I still made you my maid of honor." "Becca!" Danielle's voice broke. "Because I thought if I kept you close, I could control it. I thought my claim on him was stronger than whatever you two shared." Rebecca smoothed her dress with shaking hands. "I was wrong." They sat in the bridal suite. Rebecca on the couch, still in her gown, Danielle on the floor with her head in her hands, Christopher standing by the window like he might jump. Three people who'd failed each other in different ways, trying to find words big enough to contain the damage. "So what now?" Christopher asked, his voice breaking. Rebecca stood. "Now you two figure out if what you feel is real, or just the thrill of forbidden fruit. Now I grieve the marriage that never was. And now Danielle and I..." She looked at her former best friend. "We figure out if 20 years of friendship can survive this." "I don't know if it can. Can a friendship survive this kind of betrayal? Is it even betrayal if no one intended to hurt anyone? Where's the line between following your heart and protecting the people you love? Share your perspective." Danielle stood, tears streaming. "I'm leaving Charleston, tonight. I can't be here. Can't be near either of you. I'm sorry, Becca. I'm so sorry." She moved toward the door, and Christopher's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Don't go," he whispered. The touch between them, their first intentional contact, sent electricity through the room. Rebecca saw it, felt it, and for the first time, understood exactly what she was losing, and to whom. They say time heals all wounds. 6 months later, the wounds were still fresh, but the people carrying them had changed. Savannah in spring dripped with beauty, azaleas blooming in riotous pinks and purples, Spanish moss swaying in the breeze, the kind of warmth that makes you believe in second chances. Christopher stood at his mother's grave with flowers, talking to her the way he'd forgotten to for years. He'd moved back to Savannah 3 months ago, started a foundation in her name that provided free dance classes to kids who couldn't afford them. "I think you'd be proud of me, Mom," he said quietly. "I'm finally doing something that matters. Finally choosing joy over safety, like you told Danielle." He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. She loved azaleas. Christopher turned. Danielle stood 10 feet away, holding wildflowers. 6 months of separation had done nothing to diminish the pull between them. If anything, distance had clarified it. She looked different, stronger, settled into herself. Her hair was longer, her eyes clearer. "I didn't know you were in Savannah," Christopher said, his voice rough. "I've been here for 4 months," she replied. "I knew you were here. I stayed away on purpose." "Why?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I hurt Rebecca. Because I didn't trust myself around you." Danielle knelt to place her flowers beside his. "I hear you're doing incredible work with the foundation, teaching kids to dance for free, giving them what your mother gave me." Christopher knelt beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. "I hear you're changing lives at the community center. 20 kids enrolled in your program last month alone." They'd been keeping tabs on each other while maintaining distance. Both smiled sadly at the admission. "I've thought about you every day," Christopher confessed, his eyes on the flowers, unable to look at her. "I've composed 1,000 texts I never sent. I've driven past your studio twice a week just to see your car in the parking lot. I've been a ghost haunting your life from a distance because I didn't know if I had the right to be real." Danielle's breath hitched. "I forgave myself 3 months ago. It took Rebecca calling me to make it happen. She said she was happy. She said she forgave us both. She said the only people still punishing us was us. How long should you wait after breaking someone's heart before allowing yourself happiness? Is there a timeline for when guilt should become permission? Or does love get to exist outside those rules? I need your wisdom here. Comment below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a like if this one's got you feeling something." Christopher finally looked at her, really looked, and saw everything he'd been too afraid to claim 6 months ago. "I don't want to haunt your life anymore," he said quietly. "I want to be in it, fully, honestly, if you'll let me." Danielle stood, and for a moment he thought she would leave. Thought he'd waited too long, sacrificed their chance on the altar of guilt and timing. But then she extended her hand. Not to shake, not to comfort, but to invite. "There's something I need to show you," she said. "At the studio, tonight." Her eyes held a promise that made his pulse race. "Will you come?" She had kept one thing sacred since his mother taught it to her 18 years ago, until the night she was finally ready to share it with the one person who mattered most. The studio glowed with candlelight, shadows dancing on mirrors that reflected infinite versions of possibility. Soft music played, not the song from his childhood, but something new. Something that acknowledged grief while reaching for joy. Danielle stood in the center of the room in simple dance clothes, barefoot and beautiful, and terrifyingly vulnerable. "Your mother taught me the dance," Danielle said softly, "but she also taught me that dances evolve, that we honor the past by building on it, not by preserving it in amber." She extended her hand. "Dance with me. Not your mother's version. Ours." Christopher took her hand, and the moment their skin touched, something unlocked in his chest. They moved together. Awkward at first, then finding rhythm, their bodies learning each other's language. The old steps were there, the foundation his mother had laid, but they added their own, a turn that brought them chest to chest, a dip that required absolute trust, a lift that demanded he see her strength, not just her softness. The dance ended with them breathless, foreheads touching, hearts hammering in sync. "I love you," Christopher whispered, the words he should have said 6 months ago finally finding air. "I love you, and I'm not afraid anymore." Danielle's response was a kiss, deep, claiming, filled with everything they'd denied themselves. His hands tangled in her hair, hers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. They stumbled against the mirrored wall, the kiss intensifying, months of restraint dissolving into hunger. "Here," she gasped against his mouth. "Now." "Everywhere," he answered, lifting her as she wrapped her legs around his waist. "Always, for as long as you'll have me." They made love on the studio floor, surrounded by candles and mirrors that reflected their joining from every angle. Vulnerable and beautiful, and finally, devastatingly honest. Each touch was a conversation. "I see you. I choose you. I'm not afraid anymore." When he moved inside her, their eyes stayed locked, refusing to hide from the intimacy of the moment. "This is real," Danielle breathed, her body arching to meet his. "This is worth everything we lost to find it." Christopher buried his face in her neck, overwhelmed by the rightness of it. The way her body fit his, like an answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the studio floor, skin cooling in the night air. Christopher traced patterns on her shoulder, mapping new territory, claiming new memories. "My mother knew," he said quietly. "When she told you to find me, to remind me about the dance, she knew we'd end up here." Danielle turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "She knew you needed someone who understood loss but chose joy anyway. Someone who'd fight for you even when it meant fighting against you. Someone who'd love you enough to let you make your own mistakes, and be there when you were ready to try again." 1 year later, the studio is full of children, their laughter bouncing off mirrors as Christopher and Danielle teach them the dance. His mother's dance evolved and expanded, a living legacy. Little Amara is there, now 6, leading the younger kids with confident grace. Rebecca visits sometimes, bringing her fiancé, the man who loves her the way she deserves. The wound has become a scar, still visible, but no longer bleeding. In the back of the room, Christopher catches Danielle's eye across a sea of dancing children. She smiles, he smiles back, and they move through the routine in perfect sync, not because they've practiced, but because they've finally stopped fighting the rhythm that's been there all along. That night, lying in bed in the apartment they now share above the studio, Danielle's head on his chest, Christopher whispers, "Thank you." "For what?" she asks, drowsy and content. "For teaching me the dance again, for refusing to let me marry the wrong person, for being patient when I was terrified, for loving me when I didn't deserve it." She props herself up to look at him, her expression fierce and tender. "You always deserved it. You just needed to believe you were worth fighting for, even if the fight meant losing everything first. So what would you do if someone saw your worth before you believed in it yourself? Would you run? Or would you build something that lasts? Comment below with what you would have done in Christopher's shoes, or Rebecca's, or Danielle's. Because every choice in this story came with a cost, and every person paid it differently. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the difference between safe love and true love, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what you think you know about relationships, destiny, and the courage it takes to choose joy over safety. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest: the wedding that didn't happen, the 6 months of separation, or the dance that brought them home. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running from the person who makes you feel most alive. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next story.